Hey guys, welcome to week 5 in our course in Ableton Live. It's been plodding along nicely and it's been great to chat to you guys in the meetings and see where some of you are at. And I hope that it has been helping you with your compositions. So this week I just wanted to concentrate on mixing techniques and some of the audio effects that are in the audio effects menu. Now I'm sure you've seen them and wondered what they do. So this week's going to be a good chance for you to get a better fundamental understanding of what some of these effects do, how they process the audio and the results that follow. And we're just going to show you some other cool things that you can do to just make your sounds a little more complex than what they do just from the get-go. So there are a few important fundamentals to begin with when mixing a song. The first place to start is certainly EQ, or equalization. Now what EQ does is it's basically the control over the frequencies, and you can boost and you can cut frequencies to the desired amount so that they sit nicely in the mix. Now a good place to start with this is I'm just going to take the EQ8 here. Now there are two options for the EQ. There's EQ8 and EQ3. Now the difference is the bands of equalization. So in EQ3 you only have 3 bands to choose from and to manipulate. And with the EQ8 you have 8 bands, which means you can fine tune and be far more precise with your EQ. So for this I'm going to drag the EQ8 onto my chord here, onto my chords. Now the first thing to understand about EQ is you basically want to take away the frequencies in the element that don't need to be there. So for example, in these chords, let's have a listen to them soloed by themselves away from everything else. So we hit the solo button and we'll have a listen. Now, if you look at your EQ down the bottom, let's get some more movement, you can actually see the frequencies and it shows you right until there's no sound where the peaks and the troughs in the frequencies are for that sound. Now, for this sound specifically, it's kind of more mid-range to high range, so we don't need many of the bass frequencies in this sound. The reason why is because other elements of the song, such as the bass line or the kick drum, they're going to take up a lot of space within that frequency range. So we're going to get rid of the bass from these chords to allow space for the other elements to shine. And you can simply do that by dragging these numbers here to the desired effect. And there are different kinds of EQ. So we can make it drop like that, a high pass filter, which takes all the frequencies below that range out. And you can hear it boost. So I'm going to cut it from about 200 hertz. Now down the bottom, and we can expand this, down the bottom you have your hertz here. And it is not linear, it is an exponential curve. So you can see 100 hertz to 1 kilohertz here, 100 to 1 kilohertz, and then from 1 kilohertz to 10,000 kilohertz. Sweet. So about there. Now you can hear that the bass has been cut out and we're just left with kind of the mid to high range frequencies. Now for the sake of this element, that's probably all we need to do. And a good starting point for most elements that don't require bass is to just go ahead and take those bass frequencies out straight away. So if you have any elements that don't need any of the detail in the bass, take some of that out and it will allow a lot more room for the other elements. Now, it's always best to obviously do some EQ soloed, but the desired effect is that it sits in the song. So we need to listen to it with the other elements. So I'm going to listen to it with the drums and the bass. And I'm just going to stop that EQ so you can hear the difference. It is quite subtle, but once we turn the EQ on, you can hear that chord is just sitting nicely above the bass and the drums. Awesome. Now we would now go through and add the EQ to the lead and the strings as well, because those two elements don't particularly need much of the bass frequencies either. So let's just do that quickly. Awesome, and with this string line as well. So already those elements are sitting much nicer together than they were initially. So obviously that is a very, very short explanation of what EQ does, and it's a good place to start. Now you can also fine tune your EQ a lot more than that by using the other variables. So you've got frequency and you've got the gain. Now you can see that the gain is how much gain you're boosting or you're cutting the frequencies. And you can then change the frequency like that. Now there is another control called the Q, and the Q is the width of the frequency sweep. So you can see as I change that Q, it makes it a more precise element to boost. So from here, if I boost or cut the gain, you can see it's a much more specific kind of range that we're working with. So if there was a particular frequency that was undesirable, or a frequency that perhaps lacks and you need to boost it, this is how you do it. By getting nitty and gritty and getting very specific with the frequencies by dragging and changing the gain and the Q like that. So just for now, have a play around with taking some of the bass out of those elements and just getting your head around the EQ function in Ableton. Cool. Now let's have a look at the next element, which is compression. Now you hear of compression a lot, and what compression is it's basically, it will reduce a sound as it gets too loud, or it will boost a quiet sound to meet in the middle. Now with compression you must be wary because you do lose a lot of the dynamics by adding too much compression, and if you compress every element it leads to a muddy mix. So we've got to be sparing with the compression. Compression can also add a lot of character, and a lot of old vintage external compressors outside of Ableton have a real character, and you can almost use them to overdrive things and whatnot. So to give you an understanding of what the compressor does, I'm just going to show you what it does to some drums by themselves. So let's listen to the drum soloed. Now there are a few different kinds of compressors. You've got multi-band compression, glue compression, normal compression, bus compression. I could go on. But for this we're just going to look at the compressor. We're going to just drag that into our drum rack, like so. And you can see that it's working. Now basically, if an element of the drums get too loud at a desired point, we're going to set a threshold so that, say the threshold is here, when the sound jumps above that threshold, the compressor is going to drag that sound back to where that threshold is set, which means it will be a consistent volume. And same with you set the threshold at the bottom. If it gets too quiet, it will spring up the sound to that threshold so that you're basically evening out the sound. It's really popular on vocals. Obviously the human voice goes up and down, loud and quiet, and it will just bring those dynamics in a little bit. Again, like I said, you don't want to completely murder your dynamics by compressing too much. So let's just have a look what it does on the drums. So I'm going to set my threshold down a little bit, so we can see on the right here that the compression has started. And if you go over here, you can see what the compressor is doing. So as those drums are hitting the peak, it's bringing it back down so that it doesn't take away too much. And you can change the attack and the release of the compression, which means how quickly the compressor opens and closes. Now with a fast attack, the compressor is going to open up straight away, and then with a slow release, it will slowly close. And you can change these by just kind of turning these knobs here. So I'm going to make a not too fast attack, maybe 50 milliseconds. And then I'm gonna just turn the release so you can see it kind of swelling in time with the song. You kind of want the release to be hitting the note as it finishes. So you can see that orange marker is coming back and it's down at 0 by the time the next note is hit. Now that's a good starting place with compression. So have a play around on the different elements. Now with the drums, it will really suck all the elements together and add a lot of drive to the sound. I particularly use compression on most elements of my drums. Mainly to add character, but also just to glue all the elements together. Another good thing to try with the drums specifically is using a glue compressor as opposed to a normal compressor. So that's the normal compressor. I'm just going to delete that and we're going to drag in a glue compressor for comparison. Now again, I'm going to set that threshold. And it's doing a lot. You can see that the volume has actually cut because I've brought that threshold down. So I'm going to use the makeup gain here to make up that lost volume. And basically with glue compression, you want the compression to be the same volume as the drums with or without the compressor. So there you can hear the compressor working, but it doesn't jump in volume up or down too much, which is kind of desired. So have a play with the glue compressor on the drums as well. Now I'm going to listen to the other elements with the EQ that we just added, just to get a reference before we move on to some other effects. Before I jump ahead, actually, let's just quickly EQ that bass line. Taking that same theory that we covered just before, we're going to take all the frequencies in the bass that are undesirable out. So a lot of the high frequencies to mid frequencies are unnecessary with bass. So we're going to use that same scoop and we're going to take all the frequencies out of the bass from about 1 kilohertz above. Now that's going to leave a lot more space for the other elements with less bass in it to sing. And you'll hear that straight away once I take that bass down with the highs a little bit. And by itself, let's have a listen. So it takes a lot of the airy, the breathy kind of sound out of the bass. Cool, so those EQs are sitting nicely. Next thing I'm going to have a look at is some of the delays. Now with the delays, there are a few ways of doing this, and we have these things here called sends and returns, which I have kind of been using in the other weeks without much explanation. So we can simply drag delays and reverbs and other effects onto each track as desired, like so. So if we wanted to add some reverb, now reverb is reverberation. It's the sound of a room or an environment, and Ableton has a lot of different kinds of reverbs to choose from. So I'm going to take the bright room, which is one of my favorite ones, put it on the chords here, solo them, and without you can hear it's a bit dull, not much going on, and when we add the reverb, kind of gives it a bit more space. We're going to turn the dry and wet signal down. And you can change the decay time, the pre-delay, and a lot of other variables with the reverb to get the desired sound. Now, one thing to note with effects as well, and this goes back to the sends and returns, there are two ways of doing this. Now, with the reverb, I find if you drag lots of different kinds of reverbs to different elements, it starts sounding a bit strange because you've got different environments and you're sending signals to different reverbs that sound like they would be in different places. Now, one way to challenge this and to get around it is by using the sends and returns. So here we've got two sends. We've got a reverb send and a delay send. And in that reverb send, we have a reverb here. So I'm going to get rid of that reverb and I'm going to use the reverb send for the chords instead. And by simply dialing this A dial like that, that will send that signal to my reverb send over here. Now, one of the benefits of using sends and returns is that it uses a lot less computer power when using Ableton. And you can imagine if you've got 100 channels of audio, instead of having 100 reverb units on each one, you've got one reverb unit and you send the desired amount from each element to that send. So I'm going to use that send to send a little bit of the chords to it. And you can solo the reverb send to hear what's actually happening within it. And you can hear that I've got a little bit of the chords. If I add that lead and then dial in a bit of verb, you can hear that that lead line has been sent. Now altogether, and certainly one of the benefits of this is that it sounds like it's all in one space. It's all using the same reverb, which is awesome. Same again, we have a reverb and a delay send. So the delay is, it delays the signal, as most of you would know, and by using that delay, we just have to dial in the B send. And you can change the parameters of the sends and returns by simply going in, and you will see the unit there. Now you can drag any unit you would like, and you can add as many sends as you like. And we do that by going create, insert return track here. So we have a C return. Now for an example, I'm going to use another effect. And what shall I use? I might use a phaser, which is an interesting one to use. Now I won't go into too much detail about a lot of these effects because there is a lot to learn, but it is just good to play around with some of them and drag them into your elements and see what happens. So I'm going to drag the phaser in just to show you into return C. It's actually very, very subtle and is probably a bad example. So what else can I use? I can use maybe another delay on a different send. And we can turn these down. Cool. So by simply making a new return track and dragging our desired effect in, we can use a lot less computer power and we can make sure that all the elements sound like they're in one cohesive space. Now these are a few very basic mixing techniques that I've showed you today, but I just wanted to give you guys a more fundamental understanding of how to make some of those elements gel together. So take the work that you've done in the first few weeks and apply some of these techniques across your channels. So try adding some compression to the drums to beef it up. Try taking out some of the undesired elements from frequencies from your element, should I say, using the EQ. And try playing around with the sends and returns and using the reverb and the delay, which is already set up when you open an Ableton channel. And if you want to challenge yourself a bit more, try making a third or a fourth return send and playing around by sending some more effects and whatnot. So I hope this has helped you, and I look forward to taking you through one of our last weeks next week. Any more questions, please send through to my email. As for now, enjoy yourself, guys. Thank you.